Well, it never gets quiet without my asking for it to be quiet. Whoa! It's because you're here. Well, good evening. Good evening. I'm David Cole. I'm the Executive Director of Hagley. It's a pleasure to welcome you here this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome a lot of you here this evening. If anybody's in the back, just coming in, looking for a place to sit, we have, by my count, 1, 2 single seats. Does anybody else have a single seat? Here, there, and there. We've got about 5, 6 more down below here, and then it looks like maybe about another 10 or 15 or so upstairs. So I think we'll be able to squeeze just about everybody. We should do this every week. We'll negotiate that later. Well, again, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to a very special evening. I think that's an understatement. Our program tonight is the final installment in a series of programs we have presented this spring that are in celebration of automobile culture. These programs have coincided with our exhibition, Driving Desire, Automobile Advertising and the American Dream, which is currently on display in the Hagley Museum Visitor Center. If you've not yet had a chance to check out this show, I strongly encourage it. It is a wonderful peek at the American love affair with the car in the 20th century. So if you haven't had a chance yet, please go check it out. Our program this evening is entitled Car Stories and Recollections, and it features a very special guest, a gentleman who needs no introduction here, but if he will indulge me, I would like to say just a few words about him. Irénée Dupont Jr. is the great-great-grandson of E.I. Dupont, founder of the DuPont Company. He is a graduate of Tower Hill School and continued his education for 2 years at Dartmouth University, subsequently graduating from MIT with a degree in mechanical engineering. Mr. Dupont had a long and distinguished career at the DuPont Company, where he was a senior vice president and served on the executive committee. Along with his many professional accomplishments and the countless ways in which he has served this community, he has also pursued a lifelong interest in the automobile, and he has some stories to tell. He is going to share some of those with you this evening, accompanied by Hagley's Curator of Mechanical Exhibitions, John McCoy. I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. I know you're going to have questions. There'll be time for that at the end, yes? Very good. So please join me in welcoming Irénée Dupont and John McCoy.
Stand up. Well, good evening. So good to see so many folks here. I think you're really going to enjoy this. This is a rare opportunity. It has been for me to work with, I'm going to call you Brip because you keep telling me to, over the last couple of months here where we've worked on this particular program. You're going to see some photographs that certainly have not been the public before, and when I first was asked to participate in this, the first thing that came to mind was I wonder how he got his interest in this stuff. We all have what we kind of call an affliction, us car people, and did it start as at an early age, or how did it work? So we're really going to work through, I think the first set of photographs are here. You're somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, maybe. And I'm sure that no one's seen these publicly. They came out of several albums, and we've had a lot of fun doing this. It's been said that once the human gets past survival, he does some pretty strange things. And collecting is one of them, and it's kind of a difficult thing to understand in a way when you really think about it. I'm not sure why I do it, and I'll probably be sorry for it at some point here in the future. But the reason we collect, there are varied reasons. From it may be a hobby situation, or the other end of the spectrum, serious collecting like we do here at a museum. But the biggest advantage to me with that is sharing it. And if you don't share it, there's really not much sense in having it. And tonight, we're very fortunate that Mr. DuPont, Brip, has graciously allowed us to look into a lot of private photographs and things, so we're going to work on those. The story, we're beginning here in a residence that was pre-Grenoble, and if you're all familiar with Grenoble, I'm not sure, but you're going to see an aerial photograph of that was taken in the 20s. And it really starts on Rising Sun Avenue. So I'm going to go to that, and there it
Okay,
is.
you want me to?
Go for it.
Well, the first thing I have to admit to is that my mother and father, who happened to be second cousins, they had 8 daughters between the year 1900 and 1915, 8 older sisters. Then I came along and ruined the story in 1920. But the stories that everything of any importance in this world happened before I was born. And the picture that you're looking at is my father's 1918 Cadillac 7-passenger touring car. And the sisters loved that car. I don't remember it. It was turned in on a later model by the time I became cognizant. But the Type 57 Cadillac was still on my sister's lips, and they talked about it as though it was a golden chariot. And so there it is in front of 17th and Rising Sun Lane. It became, in my sister's handwriting, she must have been 10 years old or so when she put the picture in available to the family. Then they were all outdoors folks, and so after World War I, my mother and father decided it was time to take the kids out in the country, and they built a handsome place to live where they could enjoy horses and canoes on the Brandywine and hiking and all kinds of things, even tennis court. You can see a picture of the tennis court there. So Grenoble became quite a gathering place for all of our relatives too. Now, my father's older brother, Pierre DuPont, his interest in cars started quite early. In fact, he bought a 1892 Benz from Germany, a Benz automobile, took it around to his boss, which happened to be my mother's father, Francis G. DuPont, and he showed grandfather this wonderful machine that he had, and my grandfather got back in it, and got in the passenger seat, and they went for a ride around the circle in front of Francis G. DuPont's house, which is one of the houses you go by as you're going to Christ Church. And halfway around the circle, the part of the tire came loose and went a big piece of, like a cat and nine tails, as it was described, came off the tire and kept hitting my grandfather in the back, which was not a great way for the young man to impress his boss. So there's Pierre, and he went on later, and he became president of the DuPont Company for a spell, but on the way up, he had relatives, and the ladies didn't seem to know how to drive these gasoline cars that required a crank to start it. So he bought them a number of his sisters and some of his a sister-in-law. He bought them these Detroit Electrics, which There were 3 of them still around in my time, and there they are driving up the road right near Hagley here.
I just want to add, too, that we actually have one of these in our collection. So it's in the barn. If any of you folks, when you visit, take a look. It is a Detroit Electric, and it may be the last one in that line there in the picture, but anyway.
All right. Oh, my goodness. There's my father. He always had that curved stem pipe in his mouth, and he was quite interested in safety. So when he
Imagine that.
he got a new 1925 Cadillac, and he had it glazed instead of plate glass. He had the DuPont company supply Pyrolan plastic to put in the windows and the windshield so that there would be no flying glass in the event of an accident. So he got in there on a snowy morning when he was going to work. The ground had been covered with ice all over everything, then followed by an 8-inch fall of very heavy snow. And so he took the car out and headed down the hill from his house, and Lady Rose, he called the car because it had this red, pink-colored Pyrolan plastic for a windshield. And Lady Rose turned sideways and went sliding down the hill sideways until it amassed a big bank of snow on the side of the downhill wheels, whereupon that stopped the car and it flipped over on the driver's side. He bonked his head real hard against the plastic, but it didn't hurt him. And he climbed out of the car on the passenger side, walked back to the house, and took one of his daughter's cars and went to work. Poor old Lady Rose was rolled back up on her wheels, and if there was any fender damage, was soon hammered out by Ed Tucker, the mechanic who took care of those sort of things. And then my sister got married that same year, 1925, and she had to rush to the railroad station to pick up her husband, who was coming from some DuPont company event somewhere. And she and a truck had a little tiff together, and Lady Rose was absolutely totaled. But there were no injuries because there was no flying glass, and my sister got a taxi and went and got her husband, and the 2 of them lived happily ever after.
I need to mention that this is your artwork too here. This is your rendition.
Well,
of
we didn't
incident.
have a picture to go with it. So
Right. I understand.
I did the best I could.
That-
I think I put on a bumper of another Cadillac, but that's all right.
I thought that looked familiar.
Yeah. Oh my, what's going on here? This is, I guess, a diversion away from, you see, there was a movie actress, little boy, who had long hair, and that's me standing up on Gardner Cox's cruising ship in his Gardner Cox's backyard. I wanted to be in the seat where Gardner Cox is seated, steering this vessel. Gabriella Mahaffey is there watching, wishing that she was standing in the front, but we were, I think, on our way to someplace in the Orient at this trip. I don't remember. So, what was I meant to say about that?
Well, I wanted to mention why we have the highlight on what looks like maybe your first set of wheels. This is actually the back of that photograph, and this is some of his artwork, I believe. And when I saw those circles there, I said, well, that looks, and that may even be a hood ornament there in front of it. I'm not sure, but that's
I
fine.
think that's a bit of a stretch.
Well, let's not ruin a good story.
Can you put? Oh, here's a whole lot of pictures of life at that period. Had the 8 older sisters. They had cats, and that is there. They're feeding the cats in the upper left. Here's 3 of my sisters taking me on a trip across the fields there. They're dressed in midi and bloomers. That was the athletic attire for Tower Hill School at that time. And the midi and bloomers are seen there. The lower picture, I think we were experimenting with some clockwork-powered boats in the fountain in the garden, and I don't know, that's just family activity, I guess. And here again, this is the front of the house at Grenoble, and Billy Ferris is taking shelter behind me as we're riding on a camel across the Nairobi Desert, I believe. Over the next lower one, I visited J. Thompson Brown's family. Wilcox Brown is at the bottom of the slide. I'm right behind him. Rob Brown, who just died a month ago, is up on the upper level, and his younger brother, Glenn, who was my classmate in school and for freshman year in college. That's just the way people lived. Now we're getting to the wheels. My nurse, Molly, is holding on to me on the tricycle that you see over here, so she doesn't fall over, but I have... that just shows that we were good friends. And there's Bill Ferris again on the right with his tricycle, and I'm on the same machine as you see it riding across down the veranda at Grenoble. The central picture is the important one to me because my nurse taught me how to ride a girl's bicycle. There weren't any boys' bicycles in our house. And so that was my first bicycle, a cast-off from the various sisters, starting at my sister Constance was the first owner of that bike, and it went through 4 or 5 more sisters before it became mine. My father finally took pity on me at age 8 and gave me a boy's bicycle, and I was much relieved. Well, now these are pictures that John McCoy took of the current basement. As you see, there's the tricycle and the Mack truck, which I guess we'll talk about. And there's a bevy of bicycles if you need them.
You made up for lost time there with that.
The Mack truck was really my first car. My parents had a house in Atlantic City, or Ventnor's, it was more likely, and trips to Atlantic City, 2 miles north, brought us to the Mayfair toy store, in which this truck was posted full of dolls and other things, and most intriguing car I've ever seen. And my mother explained that the price was $20, far beyond anything that she would just buy casually.
Absolutely not.
But I did put in a few requests to my father when he arrived for the weekend, and he said, "Where is this truck?" And I said, "Well, it's at the Mayfair. Let's go down and look at it." And he did. And a few words, and it was mine. Well, his golfing buddy, Bill DeCraft, was there, and so Bill said that he would escort me home if I wanted to drive it back home to the cottage. So we drove it out on the boardwalk and went the 2 miles south on the boardwalk to Jackson Avenue and the boardwalk, where the house was in easy reach of the ramp from the boardwalk. And that was my first and only extended trip in that car. There's more just views of that. That's not mine. That 1934 Hupmobile here was bought for my nephew, Colgate Darden III. He was 10 years younger than I was, but so he got a classy roadster, whereas I was had been driving a Mack truck. Now here's Major KKV Casey, was a DuPont Company's specialist in smokeless powder, and it goes back to early days of the DuPont Company first efforts in smokeless powder. Major Casey had 3 sons, a good deal older than I was, and he built that marvelous machine. It had a defect. It weighed 150 pounds and was powered only by some young kid sitting in the back seat kicking the ground away as the car was hopefully moving forward. So there you see pictures of one of supposedly me sitting in it, and then cousin Ben DuPont is sitting in driving, and I'm glad that I don't have to move the car because it's heavy. And again, Ben sitting in the car ready to pull on the brake. And his older brother, Steve, is making some adjustment under there. I never understood what went on. But that's just an example of the kind of wheels that people did play with.
Well, I have to say that when we looked at these photographs for the first time, and we kind of had that same discussion, and he said to me, "Oh, that thing's still downstairs in the basement." Well, it was hidden back in the basement.
In the crawl space.
In the crawl space, and I said, "Well, that's no problem. I'll just go and pull it out of there." Well, guess what? 4 of us it took to get it out of there, and that's the vehicle you saw when you came in the door in its present condition, with also a Pyrolan windshield, which of course is disintegrated because of its chemical makeup, but nonetheless. So we were pretty excited to have that, and it's actually going to be featured this year at Hagley Car Show as a barn find. And you notice we left the residue on it, so in proper conservation terms there, we didn't do too much with it. But anyway, it's going to stay like that, I think so.
Okay.
Here it is. This is after we rescued it from the crawl space. So
The batteries are for lighting the headlights and the tail. It had a tail light, and that was it. And a row of switches so you could turn them off and on. But a motive power it did not have. Now, moving forward to age 12, I had an enormous allowance of 75 cents a week, which most people only got 25 cents. But it didn't take long, because there was no place to spend money out at Grenoble, that I amassed up to $20 when I was 12 years old and had no thought of what to do. But my cousin Reynolds DuPont got a new stepbrother who had a Model T Ford. And Reynolds got to take over the Ford, and I really was jealous. I have to admit, I coveted a Model T Ford. And one day, I was talking with Ernie McCoy, a chauffeur, and he said, "Oh, well, I know where there's a Ford for sale." And so one thing led to another, and $15 of my 20 went into the pocket of Hackendorn, a mechanic out at the DuPont Airport, flying field, I think they called it. And here's Hack's car, upholstered with a quilted material in the back seat, no top, but it did have special ignition system and a special carburetor, which made it go 45 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for a Model T.
And you were how old?
Oh my, I was only 12. And my father gulped when I told him I'd bought this thing. And a lot of my father's associates said, you better take him away from that right away. But my father prevailed. He said, look, the kid's going to learn something from this, so I did. So this is at Grenoble, shows the garage system. There's a big garage that's capable of 2 levels of cars, or can store 12 cars under cover, with the head chauffeur's house attached, and 2 more detached houses. One of the head chauffeur's nephew was a chauffeur, and he was in the first house, and Bill Wood was the chief maintenance man. He was at the end house there. So that shows you how convenient the garage was, a half a mile away from the main residence. There was a lot of walking involved when you needed an automobile. And there's some of these are the chauffeurs. Jack May on the left, Ed Tucker, Lou Walsh, who had the detached house. Tommy Kirby, he worked there for a while. Ernest McCoy, and Fred Smith was the head gardener. Well, they had a lot of cars to keep track of there, and this was the report that Cap Walsh, the head man, would give annually to my father. And you've done some, run the numbers on this.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff for me in here, but the mileage, for one, you'll see the last column, look in January. I don't know if you can see that from down there. Your father's car there, getting a great 8.6 miles per gallon mileage there, and apparently
that's regular for a
and
Cadillac.
it was for that era too, which
right.
we of course
I know.
got,
I can tell you all about that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And if you look at the bottom there for the total of that whole bunch of cars, you're into over 10,000 miles put on cars just in January of that year. So that goes on and on. And a series, and I guess it does point out the fact that once you moved out there, the only way you got away was with a vehicle. You weren't going to walk anywhere from Grenoble. You'll notice too, we've circled 1897. That's actually the license plate number, and you see that was your dad's, and this Cadillac Victoria's. It was.
Well, I should tell you about how he got that registration plate.
Well, we're going to show it right now. So my question is, when was the first vanity tag in actually the United States? I don't find any much before the 30s. And of course, this happened in 1927, so I'll let you tell that story.
Well, 1927 was my father's 30th reunion at MIT. He was class of 1897. And there was a governor of Delaware. His name was C. Douglas Buck. People called him Bugless Duck, but he was married to a cousin, and he was a charmer. And my father, I think, helped him get elected in some way or another. And so Douglas Buck said, well, what would you like from me? And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to go to my reunion this June in a car with a class year on it, and it might be MIT colors, Carmen red, and a gray as the background. So lo and behold, C. Douglas Buck made it happen. All the cars in Delaware had red and gray license plates, and my father's class numbers were on his, well, then a 1926 Cadillac, which he had bought because of the loss of Lady Rose. Mm-hmm. But it all went through very well, and that's the explanation of you call it a courtesy plate. Oh my, now you're getting into something else. That's me at age 20 sitting on a 1940 Indian four-cylinder motorcycle, just brand new. My mother's brother was E. Paul Dupont, who lived just over the hill there from where we're seated now, and he made DuPont automobiles. I think he succeeded in making 530 of them over a 12-year period, so it was not it was a luxury car only. But he wanted to retire in 1929 and found that the Indian Motorcycle Company would buy his automobile company. And the deal was all cooked up and ready to go when October 19th, 1929 happened, and the deal got into quite a lot of difficulty. The only way he could make it work would be to accept 51% of the outstanding shares of Indian Motorcycle. So he had to, the Depression was just starting, and he had to not only bring his own automobile company through the Depression, but he also had to make Indian motorcycles go. So that was the reason why we've been rather partial to Indians. And I bought one 10 years later as out of my own funds. It was $509 to get seated on the best motorcycle ever made. All right, so that same day, along comes his youngest son riding a penny farthing bicycle. And so we rode around together, and he's holding on to me like Molly did when he didn't want to fall. It was a long way there. But Lex, I think, would have been 12 years old in that picture. That motorcycle I loaned out to friends every now and then. And this friend, I believe, is known to have gone making his deliveries from this motorcycle. Back again at Uncle Paul's front yard. Uncle Paul, somewhat later, Lex, you see, has grown quite a bit. This is 1946, I think. Yeah, you've got it right there. Lex has grown up. I'd gotten married, and here's Barbie and me at the helm of a live steamer. It's called a 1898 Mobile steamer. It was Uncle Paul restored it, I think, with the help of Tom Marshall's father. That was big senior Tom Marshall. And so the two of them worked together and put it in condition there, and I believe it's over at Tom Marshall Jr.'s establishment.
It is there now, I believe. And I see Richard's in the audience, so you would know that, yeah. Okay.
And then I was spoiled rotten. Here's my birthday present given to me on Christmas Day of 1935. I was 2 weeks shy of being 16 at the time. But somehow, miraculously, the car was registered in my name, and somehow it got out on the road places without a licensed driver in it at all for 2 weeks. But that started a long love affair with a 36 Oldsmobile, which you may have seen as you came in. My father said, gave it to me, and he said, and I'll give you a new one when you wear this one out. But he didn't live long enough, and it hasn't worn out.
I have to ask for a show of hands here. Anybody here who has had their car for 80 years? Enough said.
The car took me through high school and college, the Oldsmobile, that is. And by the time Barbie and I were moved to Parkersburg, West Virginia, the engine was using a lot of oil and made sort of funny noises. And so I took Barbie, by that time, had gotten a Chevrolet for herself. And so we did have another car. I took the engine out of the Oldsmobile, slid it down the board into the cellar. And here we are in my Parkersburg workshop. I should mention earlier the Model T that you saw. Some years after I had gotten other vehicles, I traded it to a friend for this bandsaw. And so there you see the assets connected with the Model T Ford on one side of the picture, and the main block of the Oldsmobile getting it honing out the bore to oversize to fit new pistons, and crankshaft was properly done at a machine shop, and it went back together, and it hasn't been changed since. Now forward another few years, 1956 was our 12th wedding anniversary. I knew that my cousin, who had the Volkswagen agency at that time, had been talking a lot to my wife, and she succumbed to some of the things that he was proposing. So when I brought the kids back from church, why, this was in the front yard with all of the different colored crepe paper draped over it, but it had started to rain, and the color of the crepe paper had penetrated all through the nice new fabric top. Well, it wasn't as bad as you might see. Those dyes that come on crepe paper aren't light fast, and by 2 or 3 weeks, there was no traces of the damage. But that car stayed on the roll as my regular driver for 24 years. And if you need to go for a Volkswagen ride, it's sitting out in the garage at home. There it is, ready to go. But it hasn't been licensed for quite a while. It's as is. It hasn't. The engine and the running gear's all fine. It just needs a little body work here and there. That guy, the Volkswagen, got replaced by a Chevette, and the Chevette is still in the garage. It's a cripple right now. Maybe one of these days, Mr. Mandich can do something about it. And so the final car that I've been driving is shown in this picture here. This is a 1999 Oldsmobile Intrigue. It does very well, everything that I need. It's a good car. I hope it goes for another 3 years, when I think I'll probably stop driving.
Nah.
Well, now you've brought up the car that changed my life. There's, I was trying to think how to bring this about. I guess David Cole mentioned that I'd gone 2 years to Dartmouth, where I was taking chemistry with the hope of becoming a chemist. And then was going by the, pedaling my bicycle past a junkyard, and there was this 1918 Type 57 Cadillac 7-passenger touring car, just like the one that I'd been told about by all my sisters. And there it was in the junkyard. And so for $40, it was mine, and fixed it up a little bit, but it was really ready to go. After the tires that blew out, I got some more, but here you are seeing in sophomore year driving from Hanover to Wilmington, leaving the people with their hats on who were just wanted to ride as far as New York. They had to pay for the gasoline. I'm about to put oil into the engine. It was quite consumed a lot of oil at that time, about 2 quarts per 100 miles. But during sophomore year, I was taking chemistry, and my roommate was taking chemistry. And he said he didn't really want to be a chemist. He wanted to be become a doctor. He could go to the Dartmouth pre-med course, but Dartmouth didn't offer any engineering for mechanical engineers. And I enjoyed working on this car, and I certainly got tired of learning all about chemistry, which seemed to me it made as much sense as Latin. But so the roommate said, well, why don't you write a letter to MIT and see if you can make a transfer? And don't be silly. I wouldn't do a thing like that. Well, he said, try it. And so I wrote a letter and got the catalog. And there was some more exchanges of mail, and next thing I knew, they had accepted me into the sophomore class again. I would lose a year, and had a great career as a result of having this car, and went to MIT. That kept me out of the draft. Worked for Ranger Aircraft Engines all through the war. And for better or for worse, it was all because of buying a $40 Cadillac. So here's the Cadillac today on a routine event. I think I got a friend here in the front seat. She's in the audience. I won't make any comments. But she's been taking care of me for the last 71 years, and it's a good piece of work. Oh, man. That means it's time to go home?
Not yet.
No.
No,
Well, I'll keep on if you want. How's our time doing?
No, we're doing fine.
Okay. Well, here's
You want him to stop? No.
Pictures of the Cadillac doing its thing. Here's a wedding with the bride and groom in the back seat, and I don't know, it looks like a familiar little chapel here. Another picture, or what are we?
I recognize the chauffeur in there. That is you at the wheel.
The chauffeur's hat? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's just a routine picture.
Absolutely.
And it got picked up, the same car got picked up by one of the Philadelphia Cadillac and LaSalle Club. but it's been a very useful car.
The next thing we're going to show here is an excerpt from a television program, and it's kind of an interesting story because when I contacted the gentleman that does this programming, which is all about, it's called My Classic Car, with a fellow by the name of Dennis Gage, and I talked to Dennis, and our interest was to bring him here to film the Hagley car show and have it on his program, which has a viewership somewhere in the 80 million people or so. And when I talked with him, he said, well, what do you have interesting around there? First of all, we like to shoot 2 days of activities, not just one. And I suggested a couple of things, and one was Marshall Steam Museum. And I said, well, you can do that on Saturday, and Hagley shows on Sunday. And he said, well, who runs that? And I said, well, a gentleman, Tom Marshall, and a group of volunteers, and it's a great place and very interesting. And he said, well, how old are these people? And I said, well, Tom usually doesn't say, but I'm sure he's in his 80s. He said, oh, I don't have any interest. No, my audience is 40, 50-year-olds with muscle cars. We don't. And I said, well, at the time, he wanted to film a couple of DuPont automobiles, one was the last one made and another one. And I told him about Grenoble and said, there's a couple of miles of roads there and it'd be a good place. And well, who has that place? And I told him, well, a gentleman by the name of Rene Dupont Jr. And how old's he? I said, well, I think he might even be over 90. Oh my God, no, I don't have any interest in him. Well, what I'm getting around to is we finally did convince him to come to Wilmington. So I want to show you this excerpt from the show, and you'll never guess who we wanted to interview.
Welcome to My Classic Car. Well, this week we're in Wilmington, Delaware, at the Hagley Car Show, held on the grounds of the Hagley Museum and Library, which is actually one of the original DuPont manufacturing facilities where they made gunpowder. Go figure. This is a great show. It's capped at 600 cars, but I gotta tell you, the drive-in alone is worth the price of admission. What a great facility. But I digress. There are some incredible machines here. Let's get around and check them out. You'll take that thing. Still ahead? We'll see what else made it to the Hagley Car Show. Irénée, this is an interesting car. It's a 1918 Caddy.
That's correct.
And what's the model?
It's called a Type 57, which is, they didn't always change the model every year in those days.
So this 57 spanned a few years
Would
ago?
have been a 1918 or 19.
So you've had it since 39?
Yeah, that means 72 years ago.
Well, this is so cool. Now, you actually even have in here what they call the Batman steering wheel. Is that
Oh
right?
yeah, this is set up now for a fat man to get into the car. If he wouldn't fit through here, I can just barely go through there and I put straps with my belt buckle all over the wheel here. So I'm learning to drop the wheel before I get in. Yeah, just squeeze these two little buttons together. That's it.
And is this the original wheel?
Oh, yeah, there's nothing new about this car except the seal beam headlights and the upholstery went new in 1962.
And this is the gauging that was in a 1918 Caddy?
Yeah.
And then how about these little jump seats back here?
That makes it a 7-passenger touring car. See, these are, you can leave, let people get in the back that way, or you can actually close it all up that way. So that's, makes a nice family car.
Awesome. Now, what power is the 1918 Caddy?
A V8 engine.
Go with that?
Yeah, we gotta have a look.
Got it, look at that. Go around.
All right. Now let's say 314 cubic inch V8.
you fire it?
Sure.
Go ahead and fire it. I want to see this thing on.
I'm a thin man.
Yeah, you can do that. Good one.
There, you're all set.
That's fantastic. It runs like a champ. This is a fantastic car.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for your car. You're gonna take her.
Shall I shut her down?
Shut her down. Now that's a car. Oh man, Hagley Car Show in Wilmington, Delaware is beyond belief. Fantastic car show, but the grounds are unbelievable. You really gotta check this one out. You will not be disappointed.
Well, I don't know. Questions? It's really, I don't really have much to tell you.
Nobody? Terry?
For two more stories. One about your return to reunion at Dartmouth when you went back to the junkyard where you got the Cadillac.
Oh my, yeah, that was worth it. When I bought the Cadillac from Bailey Brothers Auto Salvage Company, they had two junkyards, one up in northern Vermont and one in West Lebanon in New Hampshire, 4 miles from Dartmouth College. And the person I dealt with was an older man. He was 26. And he was apparently married to the daughter of one of the Bailey brothers. So he was learning the trade. And he was the one that selected the $40 price tag and stuck to it. Well, I got to be quite friendly with him because I made a point of if I picked up a nut or a bolt that I was going to take home, I would show it to everything that I got from the junkyard I paid for. And he'd never seen that happen in a junkyard. So we were friends, and he put new tires on it for me, and he told me where I could get a safety glass in the windshield and things that were important. And then I moved down to MIT and made trips back to Hanover when I needed some more parts or show the junkyard to my friends at MIT. So I kept up with him at least until the war was well underway. Then our 55th class reunion at Dartmouth, which would have been, well, 55 and 42, where we get 97, 98, no, 2000 it was, wasn't it? Where we were.
Was it your 60th reunion?
Maybe that's what it was, the 60th reunion. Anyway, Barbie and I drove up to Hanover because Barbie came from Hanover during her youth. And I said, Barbie, I got to stop in at the Bailey Brothers Auto Parts here. The junkyard was gone, but the parts store was still there. And I took out my camera and took pictures of the front of the building and then walked in. And I saw two faces looking back through the storefront glass. They looked rather frightened. There was an older woman and a young man. And I walked in and said, and I was wondering if there was a man named Paul Bond here. And they looked at each other and giggled. They said, well, we thought you were coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation when we came. But I see you're friendly. And he said, "You're asking for Paul Bond?" And they giggled some more, and would you like to talk with him? And this was apparently I was talking to his daughter and his grandson. And they said, "He's in the back room there." So I walked into the back room, and there's a guy punching away at a computer and sweating and rubbing his forehead and everything. And he looked up and said, "Oh, Mr. Dupont." He'd overheard me talking in the front yard. But that was a nice reunion. Unfortunately, he didn't live out that summer. He was 89 when we talked.
As long as we're asking for stories that you didn't tell, how about the 1950 snowstorm in the Oldsmobile?
Is this on the picture of the Oldsmobile? It was still at Parkersburg, West Virginia. My job was to keep some of the machinery going in what we called the nylon building, where they were making nylon resin into fish leaders and monofilaments and selling molding powder. But the fact that it was nylon just made it, because it was new, and one of the machines kept breaking down. And my job was to keep it going, and I was working the double shift because I wasn't a very good engineer and couldn't see what the trouble was. But they finally at 2 o'clock, I thought the machine was running, and I said, "I'm going home." Well, it was snowing hard. It had been snowing, that was Friday night, and had been snowing since Thanksgiving afternoon, Thursday. And I got out to the guardhouse at the front of the plant, and there were 10 men who were stranded because they hadn't been able to get their rides home with ride pools, 10 people. And there was a 5-passenger Oldsmobile, and by that time I had chains on the rear wheels. So I said, "Well, let's all get in." And they put 3 across the front seat, 3 across the back seat, a lap sitter in the front seat, and lap sitters on the back seat, and one man lying across the backs of the front seat. So we had 11 people in that car. And it was the best snowmobile that was ever made. The chains made it impossible to stop. And we got everybody home that night. Oh, there's
Any others?
How many miles have you put on the 35 Oldsmobile?
I just wrote it down this evening. What was it? Well, it's 159,300 or something like that. Yeah, it's got 159,000 miles, so it's not really been used very much.
How about the time your dad drove the wrong Oldsmobile home from the Wilmington Club?
A confusion of automobiles. My father had a place in Cuba in the winters, and down there he had a 1936 Buick. And back here at Wilmington, he had a 1936 Cadillac. And so he went to lunch at the Wilmington Club when he just come back from Cuba. and getting out of the Wilmington Club. It was rather informal in those days. You always left the keys in the switch of the car so that people could move them around if they were in the way. And he got into a 1936 Buick instead of a Cadillac and drove it home. Well, I came out about the time he was getting ready to go to the office, and I said, "Oh, Dad, where'd you get the new Buick?" Buick? Yes, that's a Buick, isn't it? And he looked at it. Yes, it's a Buick. I wonder what. Oh, so I reached in the glove compartment and found that it belonged to Isaac Fogg, the president of Atlas Powder Company. So Dad went to the telephone and he said, "Oh, hello, Ike. I understand we traded cars." "Traded cars, hell," he said. "Somebody stole mine." Well,
Any others?
you've had some good ones.
We're down to the final part here.
All right. What do you think?
The missus up on the stage.
Oh, I'm wondering what we've got here. Yeah.
Let's see.
Is this to take the whole works or
That is
just out of it?
That is for her. I will take that
Take
out
it
of
that
there.
way?
Absolutely.
Goodness.
Look what you've got here.
Oh, stay up there. Stay up there. Stay up.
What are we to do now?
Beats me.
I forgot my line. What was it?
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Thank you. That was you two are the dynamic duo. That was.
It worked out all right, I guess.
I think that's an understatement.
He,
yeah.
he played me like a piano, you know?
Well, he does that.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. You're right.
Thank you. Now you've got some toys. Take it off here.
They're going to come down from upstairs and take them.
Oh, yeah.